When you ask people to pony up money to bring your next album into the world, then you get a real sense of like how much people are willing to support your music in real dollars, not just, like with a like or a tweet or whatever.
Hello and welcome to Art Restart, where we learn from artists who, wherever they work, whatever they make, are shaking up the status quo in their fields and in their communities. I'm Piercarlo Talenti, the producer and editor of this podcast, which is brought to you by the Thomas S. Keenan Institute for the Arts at the University of North Carolina's School of the Arts. In this episode, we'll be speaking with composer Christopher Tin. Christopher is an award-winning and genre-bending composer whose work has been featured in a variety of settings and media, from august concert halls to the world of video games. His orchestral piece, Baba Yetu, which Christopher originally composed for the computer game Civilization 4, was the first ever musical work written for a video game to win a Grammy Award. It has since become a staple in choral and orchestral venues. Christopher received his second Grammy for his debut album, Calling All Dawns, a multilingual song cycle. Now, Christopher, who has woven scores of global genres and languages into his works, is not only adventurous as a composer, he's also an intrepid producer. He turned to Kickstarter to help him create his subsequent two albums, To Shiver the Sky and The Lost Birds, both of which explore ecological themes. Through his crowdfunding, he not only raised all the funds necessary to pull off both expensive projects, but he also deepened his relationship with his many ardent fans while also making new ones, bringing them along on intimate tours through his entire creative and production process. The Lost Birds, which features the acclaimed British vocal ensemble Voces 8, was nominated for a 2023 Grammy and has been performed all over the world. And this past spring at the Kennedy Center, the Washington National Opera premiered Puccini's unfinished masterpiece Turandot, but this time it was finished with a new ending composed by Christopher and written by screenwriter and librettist Susan Suhi Stanton. The production and its new ending were a hit with critics and audiences alike. Christopher spoke to me from his home in Santa Monica. I knew he just conducted his two newest commissioned works in Denver for the choral ensemble Cantorai. So I thought it'd be fun to send him way down memory lane and ask him if he could remember the first piece he ever composed.
Oh boy, it was a little 12-bar blues, I think. It was for a theater project that I was also doing, and I wrote a little 12-bar blues to be played on the trumpet. I think it was called Jay's Blues or something like that. That was the first piece. But then the second piece took a dramatic leap up in scope. It was a 2-act musical that I wrote.
Wow. Called
Such Sweet Thunder, a reference to a Duke Ellington song. It was one of these projects where being a pretentious 17-year-old, and those are the worst, by the way, and amongst pretentious 17-year-olds, I was particularly bad. But
as long as you grow out of it by 25, I think it's okay.
Jury's still out on that. No, just joking. But it was this 2-act musical where it was exploring the nature of art versus entertainment. In fact, the plot of the musical, which I wrote, which, there's a reason I didn't become a playwright. But the plot was basically about a jazz singer, about a world where a very well-known jazz singer, let's say she's patterned after someone like Ella Fitzgerald, has passed away. And there's a young aspiring artist who sort of sees in her like a model and somebody to try to follow in the footsteps of, basically. And so she launches her career, and she's struggling throughout the entire time with this dilemma, this duality, which we should say maybe in my later years I've realized is a false duality. But this character struggles with whether she should be an artist or an entertainer. And I know that's a very basic way of looking at the world, but it was sort of like...
But at 17, that's an important question to consider.
Right? And these are formative years of your sort of creative education, right? Like, what are you tackling here? Who do you want to be in the world, right? And so in the first act, she meets oh boy, this is so long ago. She meets a teacher who really pushes this idea that, a true artist needs to be true to their art, be uncompromising and so forth. And then in the second act, she meets a manager who takes her on the road and says, look, yes, great. You're creating art. That's wonderful. But look, if you just sing the classics and the hits, you're bringing a lot of joy to people, and that was sort of like the entertainment half of it. And to be honest, I cannot remember how I resolved it, what she realizes when she comes back. And it's something like, she realizes that, you can do both, basically. You can bring artistic integrity into entertainment and entertainment to artistic integrity. And this was a really obnoxious 17-year-old's dissertation on what artistry is.
So I do want to ask, though, about when and how you realized it was a false duality.
Oh, I only realized that a couple of months ago.
Oh, okay. Well, so it's fresh in your mind. Please explain.
You know what it is? Okay, I'll tell you. I have always approached writing music at an intellectual arm's length, in a way. The topics that I chose to write about, yes, they are very humanistic and they relate to a lot of people. But I also approach them, very either intellectually or anthropologically, in a way. You could say that, like, a lot of my pieces, for example, To Shiver the Sky or The Lost Birds, deal with these human themes, but there's often a bit of an academic sort of distance that I put between myself and the theme. Either I do it through like delving deep into the depths of history to find things to set to music, or I use well-known poets, but I just sort of keep myself out of the equation a little bit. The pieces that I wrote earlier this year, one of them in particular, Transfigurations. Now, I should mention that Transfigurations has a libretto by a very, very celebrated and well-known choral librettist, Charles Anthony Silvestri. Now, Charles Anthony Silvestri, we call him Tony, great guy, and he wrote a suite of poems for me based around this theme of transfiguration. And the last of the poems he called Tattvam Asi. Now, Tattvam Asi is Sanskrit. And it's actually etched on, these are the words that are etched on a temple in the Kerala province. I can't remember off the top of my head, the name of the temple, and I'm sorry about that. But this is a very famous temple in India where people go for a pilgrimage. People are seeking answers. And when they go to this temple, they're not allowed to just go up the mountain and check out this temple. They actually have to go through a long process of preparation before you go to this temple. And it takes at least 41 days. You have to follow a very strict diet. You have to devote, you have to do some pure acts of devotion. And you have to remove a sense of self in a way so that you can be this sort of like pure empty vessel as you climb up the hill. So after going through this preparatory phase, you're finally allowed to take the pilgrimage up to the mountain. And at the top of the mountain, there's a temple. And the words on that temple are Tattvam Asi. And that's Sanskrit for thou art that. In other words, it is you. The answer you are searching for is you. You are the solution to the problems. You are the person that you seek. And that is one of the most profound sort of rituals in all of theism, I think. It's this powerful message that, you've been spending all the time looking for everything out there, the answer to your problems, and suddenly you're told you are, in fact, the answer to your problems. I think it's a very profound sort of awakening for the recipient of that message. It's like, oh my goodness, it sort of questions all of the underlying assumptions that you'd made about yourself and your life up until that point. And that's very profound. And when I set this poem to music, courtesy of Tony, I had a similar sort of awakening where I thought, what if this whole duality, this dialectic that I predicated my entire creative life on, this idea of entertainment versus art, is just a false duality? What if that's all just, forgive me for saying so, BS? What does that say? What does that do to your creative process when you realize you've built and struggled with this sort of like these opposing forces, and you've created this false opposition between the two all your life. And suddenly you realize, you know what? That's just BS.
And yet, what surprises me saying that you discovered the false duality just 2 months ago is that looking back at your career, it seems like the career of an artist who dismissed that duality decades ago.
Well, I'm glad you say so.
Right?
You know,
So how did you work through that? Because you are someone who composed art that spanned genres and didn't seem to care whether it fell under the rubric of high art or entertainment. But how did you make a career for yourself?
Well, I think that I've always sort of deliberately sort of balanced those two. You know, let's try to make something that, if you look at it from an entertainment standpoint, yeah, has plenty of the things that make it accessible, but has a lot of depth to it for those of you who want to delve in deeper. And a lot of times that depth is not inserted via means that would alienate the casual listener. I mean, I tend to keep very familiar harmonic and structural frameworks to my music. You know, I believe in parsable forms, musical forms. I believe in, you know, development and repetition of ideas. I mean, these are things that can appeal to any music listener. But, you know, if I want to get, for example, a little more avant-garde, I will do so, but in moderation, and I will make a point of it. If I want to put a lot of subtext into the works that I do, then I do it in the lyrics or in the selection of the poems that I write, or you know, via thematic development. I mean, there's a lot. I think that you can put a lot into your music that gives it a lot of artistic integrity, but doesn't necessarily need to call attention to itself. And I think that that's what gives a lot of music legs. You know, if you can write something that upon first listen is enjoyable for one reason, but upon the 50th listen is enjoyable for a different reason, then I think you've done something that has permanence. And that's the goal, to write music that has staying power.
Are you feeling the field as a whole changing? Are you feeling that leadership in the classical music world are understanding that that duality does not need to exist?
I think there will always be purists, as you say, but I think that at the end of the day, the thing that I hope that people recognize is that, you know, good music is good music. And whether or not it adheres to a certain trend in music, I would hope that, you know, the decision makers in the classical industry can still understand that, you know, you can have it both ways in a way. There can be a piece that has mass appeal that also has a lot of craftsmanship to it and a lot of artistic integrity. And you can program that, and people can write that music. I think, though, that, you know, you asked me whether I see any sort of change. I do sort of see a change in a way. I see more articles written about finding a happy medium between, you know, pulling in audience members and staying true to a tradition or the expectations of you know, sort of academia or history in a way. And I also see people pushing on the side of, you know, saying things like, you know, film music and game music should be considered classical music. And they make all sorts of very good arguments for why that should be the case. But at the end of the day, I think it's also like, as a composer, you just can't be oblivious to the plight of the arts organizations that present your music. You know what I mean? Like, you have to, I'm a very collaborative person with the performers, with the institutions that commission me. You know, I'm here to make music that people like to perform and people like to listen to, and that satisfies a lot of sort of artistic needs of myself and maybe the broader intellectual community out there. And so I think it really does help if you approach everything with an attitude of, you know, like, yes, I'm going to make the piece that I want to make, but also I want to help you sell some tickets to this concert.
One thing that you've done, which is very 21st century, is the manner in which you've cultivated your fans. One thing you've done is crowdfunding at least 2 of your albums. Mm-hmm. Could you talk about what convinced you to give crowdfunding a go 4 or 5 years ago?
Well, 4 or 5 years ago, I was still under this perception, and this goes back to, you know, my false dualities that have handcuffed me all my creative career. I was under this assumption that real artists don't crowdfund their albums, right?
Tell me more about that assumption. What did that connote, crowdfunding your album in your mind at that time?
Crowdfunding my album just meant like saying, oh, I'm just going to throw my hat in, it almost means at the time. Okay. And I'm going to preface this by saying I no longer feel this way. So any people who have crowdfunded anything ever, please do not take what I'm about to say seriously. But at the time I thought, successful artists don't need to crowdfund. And so they don't do it, right?
Because the money will fall out of the sky from another source. Okay.
Exactly. The successful artists, they just got the money rolling in, right? And what changed my perception is I saw a couple of very successful fellow composers launching crowdfunding campaigns that were hugely successful. And I thought, well, if those guys are going to do it, then I should do it. And that's what led me to start crowdfunding. And what was miraculous about crowdfunding is that for the first time, I really got a metric for how large and devoted my fan base could be, because there aren't a lot of metrics for that. But when you ask people to pony up money to bring your next album into the world, then you get a real sense of like how much people are willing to support your music in real dollars, not just, like with a like or a tweet or whatever. And in doing that first Kickstarter campaign, I actually found that I really enjoyed talking about my creative process. I don't necessarily like shooting videos about it. I mean, many of us got thrown into this uncomfortable position of being content creators.
That's right.
In the last decade. Many of us just would rather actually make music and not content for social media. But at the same time, I really do like talking about issues of creativity, especially my own work and how I approach it. And crowdfunding gave me that platform. And I found that it was a very exciting thing for my funders too. I mean, they kind of want to know how I go from, nothing to a full release with just a concept of a idea for the theme of the album, right? They
because your videos take them really show them how the sauce is made. You take them into the rehearsal process, recording process, right?
Yeah, everything. And as the years have gone on, I've become less filtered about what I present to them as well. And I think the whole point is to invest them creatively in the process, and also just to get a lot of the ideas out into the world that sometimes I live with when I'm creating a piece, but if I don't actually write about it or make a video about it, those ideas just sort of like fall by the wayside. And making crowdfunding, Kickstarter videos for my backers was a great way in a way to journal my creative process. And by sort of journaling your own creative process, you also get insight into who you are as an artist. And when you have insight into who you are as an artist, you can more efficiently and effectively be an artist. And that's what I'm still working on at the tender age of 48, being a very efficient composer and one very in tune with his strengths, maybe his weaknesses as well, and understanding the optimal way that I work in bringing music into the world.
I'm thinking that one potential double-edged sword of being that connected to your audience is it might inhibit your adventurousness. In other words, you might be afraid to offend them or give them something you suspect they wouldn't like. Does that ever cross your mind?
No, it doesn't. In fact, if anything, the things that inhibit my creative process the most are not my audience. In fact, they're the ones who encourage my creative process in the most. What inhibits my creative process the most is those phantom voices in my head, either from critics or former music professors who said, you know what, you're not writing real music. We can't take this seriously. It's got a melody or it's tonal or whatever. That is what really suppresses my creativity. And, these voices still pop up from time to time. I mean, we're not in a world now where, anyone can just write, as much as, for example, young composers that I talk to have a very sort of open-minded approach to what classical music is, how one should compose, like the freedoms in which one can compose now. There are still a lot of people out there who will say, without even listening to your music, he writes for video games. That can't be serious music, That's got to be crap, right? And there will be people who just write you off just like that. It still happens, and all you can do is, as a wise woman said, shake it off.
Now, looking at To Shiver the Sky or The Lost Birds, would either of them have happened without the crowdfunding effort?
No, really? That's the other thing that I've really discovered, that, the reason the earlier releases that I did took so many years between them was because I basically had to recoup the funds and then fund the next one. I was able to do The Lost Birds only 2 years after To Shiver the Sky because crowdfunding accelerated that schedule for me. I mean, without it, and, again, like without sort of the reassurance, that not only financial reassurance that came from my backers, but sort of like the moral and creative reassurance that you get when, like thousands of people around the world are helping you break crowdfunding records, that gives you a lift. In a way, we are still human beings as composers. And yes, things like bad reviews hurt us, and things like good reviews encourage us, and things like audience appreciation encourage us. I mean, we're just humans, right? And I've found that connecting with my fan base is tremendously enabling in terms of my creativity. Like, they back me not only via donations, but, they encourage me to write what I want to write, and write what they want to hear. And that's a relationship that I treasure. I really treasure my fans above anyone else.
Looking back now at when you first started your first Kickstarter, what do you wish you'd known then that you know now?
What do I wish I'd learned in my first Kickstarter? I think that sometimes I can get a little carried away with this whole creating content for Kickstarter campaigns. Like the first time around, I had a full-time assistant whose job it was to help me make videos of my creative process. And these were very elaborate behind-the-scenes videos. And I sort of think now that I was misplacing I had misplaced priorities. The priority is not to sort of dazzle people with like graphics or whatnot.
It's the intimacy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the intimacy. It's just being you. Mm-hmm. And I think that when I did that first Kickstarter, maybe five years ago, I guess it was, there was still a lot of me being on guard. In my mind, there was always somebody just waiting in the wings, ready to pounce on me for, writing something accessible, or for my latest video game score or whatever. There was always this idea that there was somebody out there to get me. And I think since then, I've realized, you know what? Forget it. Forget all that stuff, just make music. Just, revel in the process of making music. And don't worry about the naysayers. They may not even exist. This may just be phantom voices in your head from your early musical education. Just do your thing. Make good music. Make your performers happy. Make your audience happy. Do it as best you can, and the rest takes care of itself.
As a composer and a conductor, you continue to work with a huge range of musical talents. So from what you've observed from the people you've worked with, what qualities do you think a young musician in any field ought to develop to thrive in today's performing arts climate?
I think being collaborative is huge. I think that this is something that I learned working through Turandot. Being flexible, being willing to work with people, and being willing to say that it's just not just my show and I'm the boss here. Like if the director needs a piece that you slaved away for weeks to compose, like cut because of dramatic reasons, do the cut, right? Like the people that you work with are there to help you bring good music into the world and good drama, good storytelling, and so forth. You need to not fight them. And I think there is sort of an attitude that you get amongst composers of a certain generation or who came up in a certain style or system, where it's like, no, you do not touch my music. This is, handed down from God. Like, it is, you do not change it. I'm the composer. I'm the boss, right? And yeah, you can adopt that attitude, but like, people would rather work with a person who is a little more collaborative. And at the end of the day, you may or may not get that call again to be commissioned to write your next work. And I always want that call. And it helps that I like working with people. And at the end of the day, I think that when somebody says, like they have a very good reason why you should cut this piece that you're really attached to, listen to them and consider their viewpoint. And I mean, I'll tell you, with Turandot, there was a musical number that I had written. It was a choral number, and it just did not work dramatically. And a few days before the premiere, we actually cut it. And there's actually footage of me sitting in the lobby of Sirius XM on my iPad, scribbling down on the score, like cuts, and how we're going to rewrite some of the strings and things like that. And I think this is an attitude that those of us who have worked commercially in the film, video game, record business, whatever it is, we've just learned to be very collaborative because, it's rarely just us making something. And I think that's an advantage that people who come from that world have. We just are used to doing a lot of things and making it work and setting our own need to be right at all times. We're setting that aside,
You can read a longer version of this interview at uncsa.edu/artrestart. We always appreciate your feedback and suggestions. Any artists you'd like me to interview, any pressing subjects you'd like us to cover, you can find me on Instagram at Piercarlo Talenti. Our theme music is by Shanghai Restoration Project. I'm Piercarlo Talenti, and on behalf of the Keenan Institute for the Arts at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts, thank you for listening.